He's opinionated. He's unapologetic. He's always real. He is Brett Mason. This is the Brett Mason Show.
Well, hello there. Welcome into another exciting edition of the Brett Mason Show. I am your host, Brett Mason. I'm going to tell you, I've not had a lot of luck with podcasts today. I'm just going to be quite honest with you. It's just been one of those things where, it's just, I don't even know how to say it. I had the show planned out. I was ready to go. Man, this is going to be one of the most fantastic shows that there ever has been. And got that puppy set up to record, and we're ready to go. And then all out of the blue, I'm rolling, and it's just really great. It's really excellent. And the show, the only bad thing I can say about the show is it just went long. It went over an hour, which I don't think I'd ever want to do for a podcast. I usually try to keep them 20, 30 minutes. But there's just so much stuff to cover. And so I get through and I publish it and I go back to listen and maybe see if I need to tweak or edit it. And my voice isn't on any of it. The clips I used from the debates are there. The sound effects, the little show openers, my little sexy Australian chick that talks there was, everything is there except me. And so, the good news is I have completely rehearsed this podcast before, which means that it probably will just be simply outstanding. So, I want to thank you if you have subscribed to our podcast in the many various ways that you can. Of course, we are available on iTunes, where everybody should be. We're also available on Stitcher. You can check us on TuneIn Radio. Our application to iHeartRadio is still pending, but TuneIn, we're there. We've been there on TuneIn. You can also subscribe to us just on YouTube if you prefer to watch and listen on YouTube. Of course, there's no video for those. We did some video early on. I'm thinking about really setting up the studio to where I can do audio and video at the same time. But for right now, it's just audio. But YouTube, everybody likes YouTube. It's easy to find, and so you can subscribe that way. And even though there's no video, you can just hit play, and it's just like listening any other way. And so if you found us that way and subscribed, man, we really appreciate it. All the links to do that are on every single podcast page on the website. And you can also download our free app, which is the easiest way to get the podcast. If you have iOS, you have Android, we are there for you. If you got Windows or some weirdness like that, I'm sorry, I can't accommodate you, but I think 90% of the population we cover with those two apps, they're free. You just search for Brett Mason Show for the podcast or for the apps or anything. Wherever you look, just search for Brett Mason Show, BRETTMASON, Brett Mason Show. And if you would like to just click a button and maybe look at all the many ways you subscribe and all the things you can do, we've set up a webpage that has all that spelled out for you. It is Brett Mason, there's a dash in between, brett-mason.com/connect. And while you're on there checking out the podcast, we have purchased a new podcast player, which is really nifty. We're going to be able to start annotating the podcast in the future. I know this is a lot of boring stuff, but it's not really boring. It's really exciting. I want to make it as easy to consume the podcast as possible. So we invested in this new podcast player setup. And so I guess beginning with this episode, if I can figure it out, I'll be able to annotate what happens into the podcast, like when we're talking about the NSA or when we're talking about the Iran deal or we're talking about entitlements, and you'll see the breakdown and you'll see at what time each discussion of each thing starts, and you'll just be able to click on that and bam, go straight to that discussion. So, for instance, if you aren't interested in the first segment, you can just click right over it. So trying to make the podcast better. I've got a lot of positive feedback. I've got some negative feedback too, but mainly because people who disagreed with me. I don't think, just as a podcast per se goes, I don't think we've got that much negative. And you know what? If you do a podcast, you put your opinions out there, people are just going to disagree with you. If I were in this to get agreed with by everybody, I would just be in a new line of work. That's just all there is to it. I'll tell you, the debates, and you've probably read all the stuff up until now, and my podcast may seem like it's coming later than everybody else's comments, but I wanted to dig into it, break it down, and try to come up with something useful other than just one-liners between Trump and Megyn Kelly. That was horrible, by the way. It was just horrible. Fox News, who I haven't cared for a very long time, they're just ignoramuses over there. It's why it saddens me when I see so many people talking about, that CNN is the devil, I only watch the Fox News. And they're both evil. They're just both equally evil. They they kind of come at it from a different angle, but they both tell one side, they leave the other side completely out, and so you get a half version of the truth no matter which side you're looking at. And then as the debate showed, they're just shills for companies, they're shills for the almighty dollar. There's nothing wrong with that. This is America. If you want to be for the almighty dollar, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But it doesn't help us a whole hell of a lot trying to figure out who to vote for president. Just let me lay that out there. And so if you're going to claim to be news and fair and balanced and all that, you need to clean your game up, and you need to quit trying to go for drama and all that stuff that you went for. It really was embarrassing. I was embarrassed for Fox News. I just really was embarrassed for Fox News. I'm going to kick things off in my analysis of the debate with a comment that was made by Ben Carson. Now, he was asked if you are the Republican nominee and Hillary Clinton comes after you, and she's digging into you or whatever, what is it that you plan to do to combat the things that she is going to say about you? What would be your plan to combat that? And that was asked of Ben Carson, and this is what he had to say.
She counts on the fact that people are uninformed, the Alinsky model, taking advantage of useful idiots. Well, I just happen to believe that people are not stupid, and the way I will come at it is to educate people.
I'm going to have to disagree just a little bit with my friend there, Ben Carson. We're not friends. I don't know him. But most people, I'm sorry to say, are stupid. At the very least, they're ignorant. And the people who aren't stupid, because there's a bunch of those. And really, there's not that much hope for them. But there are a lot of people who are reasonably intelligent, and of those, the vast majority are just ignorant, meaning they don't understand the Constitution. They don't understand why the framework was in place to do a lot of things that it does. And so, we've seen this with the sticker issue, and I hate to keep going back to the sticker issue. I made a lot of enemies over that, which is really sad, because all the people who are enemies of mine over that, I'm on their side. That's what's so sad about that whole debate. First of all, the Constitution's on my side, and that's the supreme law of the land. But secondarily, I'm on their side. And that just was so disheartening, seeing so many people that fail to grasp the concept of why separation of church and state is there to protect religious freedom, and why when you cross those lines, no matter how well-intentioned you are, I have no doubt that these police chiefs and sheriffs are well-intentioned, and they think that they're doing the right thing, and it makes them feel good, and they get to crow about it, and it makes the community feel good, and everybody just rallies around it. And I understand that. I understand the feel-good feeling behind it. But it's just such a dangerous thing to do. You're endangering the religious freedoms of your grandkids. And is it worth that? It breaks my heart. It just breaks my heart. So much that whole thing breaks my heart. But anyway, no. One of my favorite quotes of all time is by comedian George Carlin, who said, if you want to know how smart people are, consider all the people you know that are of average intelligence. So just think about everybody you know and go, I guess they're average. They're about average intelligence. And then realize that if they're average, half of everybody on the planet is stupider than them. That's how you get average. There's the same number of people below the average as there are above the average. That's pretty scary. Look, I'm not here to tout my intelligence, but I'm very, very into reading and comprehending and understanding things, and I devote quite a bit of time to it, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm quite proud of it, and I know everybody doesn't have probably the amount of time that I do to devote to certain subjects and learning and understanding them. But I do, and I feel that that's my obligation. And so, again, there's a difference between being ignorant and being stupid. And, maybe maybe I'll come around to his point a little bit, that there aren't such a huge number of stupid people, but there are a lot of ignorant people. And that's not a disparaging remark, because, God, I'm ignorant about so many things. Anything that you're not informed on, you're ignorant about it. It doesn't mean that you're stupid. That's not a disparaging word. Ignorance just means that you lack the knowledge about a certain subject, and ignorance can be fixed. I've been ignorant about so many subjects, and I decided to get educated and informed on them, and then I was not ignorant on them anymore. And then there's still a ton of other subjects I am ignorant on. And if somebody catches me on that, call me ignorant. I don't care. If it's true, it's true, man. I'm just ignorant. So I know it's kind of a negative way to set the tone for the debates, but look, the debates were just bad. I'm going to end today's podcast talking about education. That's going to be entitlements, because there was a pretty good dissertation by Chris Christie and some discussion there that I think bears a lot of discussion. And so I want to get into that in depth. So I'm saving that for last. I'm not sure what to start out with here. I think I was going to talk about the marriage thing with Rand Paul. I think I'm just going to leave that off. So I think the NSA is the big one. Iran and entitlements. I think education I can do really quickly. So let's do education because I think I can burn through that really quick. They asked Jeb Bush if he'd taken a lot of flack about supporting Common Core. Did he have comments on that? Did he change his position on that? Was he a supporter of Obamacare and all that kind of stuff? So this is what Jeb Bush had to say about that subject.
I don't believe the federal government should be involved in the creation of standards directly or indirectly, the creation of curriculum or content. That is clearly a state responsibility. I'm for higher standards, measured in an intellectually honest way, with abundant school choice, ending social promotion, challenging the teachers' union and beating them is the way to go. And Florida's low-income kids had the greatest gains. Inside the country, our graduation rate improved by 50%. That's what I'm for.
I wanted to throw that in there because I have a perspective on Common Core that I haven't seen expressed, in my opinion, quite enough. I just haven't seen it expressed enough. And I think it's something that bears repeating, and I think it's something people should think about. Common Core is very scary, and there was this big math problem that was making its rounds on Facebook for a long time. And I'm going to tell you, going back to the point of ignorance, I'm going to go back to that because I was very ignorant about Common Core at that time, and I was especially ignorant about that math equation. And I'm one of the people when that thing first started making the rounds that jumped in there and said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Why would you make math that hard? And that's a guttural reaction, which is what a lot of us do. A lot of us respond to things we see and aren't comfortable with and that don't look quite right with just a guttural, instinctual reaction without actually doing the work to learn about it. And I was one of those people, guilty as charged. But once I delved into it and I saw, what was behind that particular math problem and a lot of the other curriculum involved in Common Core and things like that, I've changed my mind on Common Core. Now, look, I'm not completely sold on it. But some of the things that Jeb Bush, and God help us, I'd never vote for Jeb, so I don't come across as being a Jeb supporter. But he's right in one sense. I mean, you got to get the grades up, and you have to, our kids have to be in a position to compete with the kids of the world, and Japan, China, places like that. They're just kicking our butt. They're just kicking our butt so bad. These kids are just so much more. They're just so much better in the maths and sciences, especially technology. God, they're just kicking our butts. And if we want our kids to be, inventing the next big thing or solving the next big problem or curing the next big disease, these kids have got to learn. So now let me just quickly, I said I was going to make this fast because I want to move through this. I do not want this to be an hour and a half podcast. I'm keeping it to 35 minutes. I've got to. So when we learn math, when I learned math, there was multiplication tables. I'm just going to use multiplication tables as an example, even though that math problem that was in that thing that went around on Facebook that you probably saw it's a lot different. It's more complicated, but I think this will simplify it. I think this simplifies it. When we learn multiplication tables, you learned your ones, your twos, your threes, your fours, your fives, and you memorized them. You memorized that 6 times 5 was 30. You just memorized it. And so for the rest of your life, you know that 6 times 5 is 30. But what you don't necessarily know is why is 6 times 5 30. Why is 6 times 5 30? Now look, that's a bit of an exaggeration because what's one of those easier things to understand the why about. Even though there's probably a lot of people out there that don't know why, I think it's a pretty basic why to figure out. But that math problem that made its round on Facebook, it was pretty complicated. And to understand the why behind that, instead of just doing your memorization of your multiplication tables and knowing the subtract and the add and whatever was involved in that, instead of just doing those things that you just memorized or you just knew, that math problem was designed to make you understand and comprehend the whys behind it. the underpinnings of why this works and the foundational principles that are involved, because that expands so far out into the world of mathematics and physics and technology and science and all these things. And if you have that deep understanding of the problem, rather than just having to solve the problem. If you solve the problem on paper, you can get a check mark for getting it right. But if you understand how the solution was arrived at and can show that on paper in great detail, you have a knowledge and an understanding that will transcend just the simple math problem. And these kids will leave our schools doing amazing and remarkable things in the field of like I said, physics and technology and the sciences and math and all of that stuff. And I want our kids to do that. And look, it's intimidating. If your kid was to bring that problem home from school, it would blow your mind. You wouldn't be able to help them. But we can't let our fear of what we don't understand impede progress. That being said, there are some things that are questionable about Common Core, but there's a lot of great things about Common Core. And so I think a better answer would be, let's look at it and examine it. Let's see what's fluff, and let's see what's going to make our kids the best and brightest and the most informed, intelligent kids on the planet. That's what I'm for. And I don't even have kids. I want that for your kids. And if your kids are grown and you have grandkids, I want it for your grandkids. That's what I want. So maybe I moved through that quickly enough. I'm not sure. I tried to move through it as quickly as I could. Let's move on very quickly to the Iran thing. Again, I have a little bit different perspective on the Iran thing. Rand Paul was asked, would you tear up the Iran deal that was just made on day one of your presidency? Which I think is kind of I don't know, maybe a question that doesn't set us up to learn a lot. I mean, it's kind of a stupid question that not a very smart person had to think very hard to think of. But Rand Paul did expound a little bit on it, and so here's what he said.
I oppose the Iranian deal and will vote against it. I don't think that the president negotiated from a position of strength, but I don't immediately discount negotiations. I'm a Reagan conservative. Reagan did negotiate with the Soviets, but you have to negotiate from a position of strength. And I think President Obama gave away too much too early. If there's going to be a negotiation, you're going to have to believe somehow that the Iranians are going to comply. And I asked this question to John Kerry. I said, do you believe they're trustworthy? And he said, no. And I said, well, how are we going to get them to comply? I would have never released the sanctions before there was consistent evidence of compliance.
One of the things that I have there, he actually brought out, and I think it's worth talking about. And I think it's worth understanding. How trustworthy are they? And to me, that's the question that people need to consider while the Republicans are standing up with righteous indignation about how bad this deal is. I have a couple of points on this deal. One is I want to try peace and every possible avenue of peace before we send people's 20-year-old kids into deserts and places overseas to die grisly deaths, to maim their young 20-year-old bodies for life, when it could be avoided. At the very least, it could be postponed until maybe something better comes along. I'm so sickened by people whose first instinct is to go to war. And I'll tell you what really gets me, and I'm going to move on for this because it'll get me in trouble again. But it really seems to me that the most war-hungry people are Christians, which goes against nearly every single thing that Jesus taught about. Look, I understand that there's a time for war. I really do. There is a time when there is no other option except the nuclear option. And I don't mean nuclear weapon, but it means the same thing. Sure, it comes to a time, but can we not exhaust every other measure first? So you don't like this deal, and you think there's no accountability, and you think they can get out of it too easily. Guess what? If they're not trustworthy and there's no accountability, it doesn't make any difference what deal you made with them. So why are you complaining about there being a better deal? If you don't think they're going to stick with this deal, what makes you think they would stick with yours? One that they probably wouldn't agree to in the first place because it would be much harsher. And then the other issue that you have is all of our other allies completely signed off on this deal. So we're left hanging. Are we going to be the lone wolf again? Are we going to once again be that country that's out there blazing the trail on its own with no allies, nobody to really stand at our side, and we're just going to enforce our opinions on another sovereign country? And whether you like Iran or not, they're a sovereign country. They haven't directly attacked us. There's an argument to be made. I hear this touted around all the time. It's amazing to me how every country over there can be the major supporter of terror. Because the Republicans say that about every country. And I hate to just beat up on the Republicans, but on this issue, they're the ones that do the most smack talking. But when they talk about Iran, they're like, Iran is the number one sponsor of state sponsor of terrorism. That Iran is. And then when they talk about Palestine, they're like, well, the Palestinians are the number one sponsors of terrorism. And then they talk about Iraq. Well, Iraq is the number one. They can't all be the number one sponsors of terrorism. That you can't keep falling back on that same line. Afghanistan they're the number one sponsors of state terrorism. They can't all be number one. Every freaking country over there can't be the number one supporter of terrorism. Does that mean that I think Iran isn't a supporter of terrorism? No, I think they probably are to some degree. How much, I don't know. But I tell you who does know, probably, and that's the intelligence communities. And I'll tell you what they also know. They know exactly how far Iran has got towards their nuclear capabilities. They've known it forever. And we don't need any agreement from Iran to let us go in there upon request and check their crap out. This is what people are up in arms about. They can hold us off for 7 days, and then we have to reply, and then there's another 7 days, and then if that don't work, there's nothing. Meanwhile, the bomb is just getting bigger. That's just not true. First of all, as Rand Paul just said, you can't hold them to anything, so it doesn't matter what your agreement is. And secondarily, the same way that we know where they're at in their nuclear races now is the same way that we'll know in the future. If they start breaking their agreements and they start growing up this nuclear bomb they're ready to bomb, we will know. We will just know. Us and about 5 or 6 other of the biggest and best intelligence agencies in the biggest and best countries in the world all have people in there. We all have intelligence there. We all know. We just all know. We all know. So I'm not sure what else I can say about that. Can we not give peace a chance? Yeah, the deal's not great. It's what nobody wants, but it's a deal that we came out of there with. Let's give it a chance before we send 5,000 20-year-olds over there to die and get blown up with roadside bombs, be decapitated and captured by terrorists and all this other god-awful stuff that happens to them. Let's give these 20-year-olds a chance to live. Let's do that first. It's a long time before Iran can hit the United States with a missile. They're so far away from doing that. Don't let them scare you. They're so far away from doing that. I understand that they're closer to being able to hit Israel, but let me tell you something. Israel don't need our help. Israel is way better at stopping terrorists and stopping bombs and they're way better at it than we are. I love how we act like we got to rescue them. Well, that poor old Israel, without us, they're just screwed. No, they're just fine without us. If anything, it'd be better if they were helping us out. They're better at stopping terrorists. How many terrorists have you seen on planes over there? It just don't happen. It just don't happen. Israel is fine. Trust me. That doesn't mean I'm saying that we shouldn't be an ally to them. Of course we should. We should have their back. But they don't need us in this. They're just fine. Trust me. Israel is just fine. They're way better than us. But I digress. I'm going to move on. Can we not give peace a chance? Can we not chomp at the bit with right-wing rhetoric and send kids off to die just yet? Can we not? So in just a minute, I would like to talk about the NSA, which is something near and dear to my heart, and I think that it's very, very important.
You can subscribe to the podcast, download the free smartphone app, and find more ways to connect to the show at brett-mason.com/connect.
I just love to hear you talk, lady. That's just one of my favorite things in the world, is to hear that lady talk. I'm going to go to over to Australia at some point in time. It would be just awesome. All right, so it's time to talk just quickly about the NSA. This was a very heated exchange between Rand Paul and Christie over the NSA. Megyn Kelly, don't even start it on her. She asked Christie if he thought Rand Paul should be held accountable, personally accountable, if we had another terrorist attack, since Rand Paul opposed and stopped the bulk collection of everyone's phone records. Now, understand how, on the face of that question, it's something just incite hostility and sound bites. It's the only reason it was asked. But seriously now, should Rand Paul be personally held responsible because he doesn't think the government should collect every single person in the world, but in America's phone records and have them and know exactly who you're talking to, where you at, where you going, all your GPS, all that stuff? I mean, is it really far-fetched to think that they shouldn't be allowed to have that? Really? Is that something so bizarre?
Yes, I do. I was appointed U.S. Attorney by President Bush on September 10th, 2001, and the world changed enormously the next day. And it happened in my state. This is not theoretical to me. I went to the funerals. We lost friends of ours in the Trade Center that day. My own wife was 2 blocks from the Trade Center that day at her office, having gone through it that morning. And we did it for 7 years in my office. And I will make no apologies ever for protecting the lives and the safety of the American people. We have to give more tools to our folks to be able to do that, not fewer, and then trust those people and oversee them to do it the right way. As president, that is exactly what I'll do.
Well, Rand Paul responded, and he responded quite forcefully. And
the Fourth Amendment was what we fought the revolution over. John Adams said it was the spark that led to our war for independence. And I'm proud of standing for the Bill of Rights, and I will continue to stand for the Bill of Rights.
Completely ridiculous answer. I want to collect more records from terrorists, but less records from other people. How are you supposed to know, Megyn?
Use the Fourth Amendment.
How are you supposed
Use the Fourth
No, I'll
Amendment.
tell you how you look.
Get a warrant.
Let me tell you something.
Get a judge to sign a warrant.
Senator.
Wait, Governor Christie, make your point.
Listen, Senator, when you're sitting in a subcommittee just blowing hot air about this, you can say things like that. When you're responsible for protecting the lives of the American people, then what you need to do is to make sure that you use the system the way it's supposed to.
I'm going to stop that right there. It was just ridiculous, and I hope Megyn Kelly's happy about that. But look, Governor Chris Christie did do an admirable job. That job was appointed by President Bush at a horrible time in our country's history. But at that time, we did not have a Patriot Act, and at that time, it had not devolved into this thing where every single phone record of every person on the planet was being collected for no reason. The government just can't do this. How many times do I have to be frustrated that people don't? I mean, he was a friggin' governor. He was a guy in charge of prosecuting terrorists. He don't understand the friggin' Constitution. Look, if you have no respect for the Constitution, I have no respect for you as a person running for president. Does anybody around here understand that the first thing you do when you get sworn into office is that you swear to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic? Does anybody understand that that's a part of holding the office? Look, if you don't understand the Fourth Amendment protections, which means that we have a right to be secure in our persons and paper and property, look, that doesn't mean that crooks go free. It just means if you suspect somebody and you're like, man, I think this guy's kind of shady, let's watch him a little bit. And then he saw this guy and, he talked to this guy and, and then the next thing you know, you have a little case there. You go to a judge and you go, we'd really like to tap this guy's phone. I think he's a freaking terrorist. The judge goes, well, yeah, it looks like you got a pretty good case there. It looks like we should check him out. That's all there is to it. That's all there is to it. It's what Chris Christie did. We didn't have this bulk collection of phone records when he was doing that. This has come up some years later. You have a right for the government to not intrude in every single aspect of your life and know everything that you say and every person that you talk to and every place you go 24/7, 365 for your entire life. We're presumed innocent. We're free. We operate in complete liberty and freedom. This is so ridiculous. You don't have to completely scratch out the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America to protect us from terrorists. You just don't. You don't have to. Rand Paul has some holes. I mean, a year ago, I thought, you know what, I'm voting for Rand Paul no matter what. If I'm going to vote for him and try to get him into the general election and try to help him get elected. I mean, he's the only one. But since then, he said some things that have made me wonder if I can follow him. But I tell you, out of all of them, I mean, he's up there as one of the ones that I could potentially vote for. Chris Christie, a guy who has no respect for the Constitution and thinks that you pursue bad people, potentially bad people, at no matter what the cost to our Constitution, at no matter what the cost to our liberty, no matter what the cost to our freedom, no matter what the cost to our heritage of this great nation, the United States of America. That's just wrong. That's just wrong. It's wrong on the very face of it. It's wrong. It can't possibly even be any more wrong. So we're going to talk about entitlements for just a little bit. Let me have a sip of water. Actually, I'll have a sip of water, and then then we will come back and talk about that in just a second.
Download the free Android or iOS app. Search for The Brett Mason Show. You can subscribe to the podcast, download the free smartphone app, and find more ways to connect to the show at brett-mason.com/connect.
So on the issue of entitlements, which is, as Chris Christie correctly pointed out, is one of the by far the largest expenditure of the federal budget. He was asked, hey, Christie, other people said they can fix entitlements without having to do any kind of cuts. Are they lying about this? That was the question. Are they lying about saying, and talking specifically about Huckabee, and this was his response.
I'm the only guy on this stage who's put out a detailed 12-point plan on entitlement reform, and here's why. Because 71% of federal spending right now is on entitlements and debt service. 71%. And we have spent the last hour and 5 minutes talking about the other 29% and no time on the 71%. And that makes no sense. Now, let me tell you exactly what we would do on Social Security. Yes, we'd raise the retirement age 2 years and phase it in over 25 years. That means we'd raise it 1 month a year for 25 years when we're all living longer and living better lives. Secondly, we would means test Social Security for those who are making over $200,000 a year in retirement income and who have $4 to $5 million in liquid assets saved. They don't need that Social Security check. Social Security is meant to be to make sure that no one who's worked hard and played by the rules and paid into the system grows old in poverty in America. If we don't deal with this problem, it will bankrupt our country or lead to massive tax increases, neither one that we want in this country.
You got a pretty good applause line on that, and I'm going to say that I pretty much agree with Christie on that. What are we at, 32 minutes now? I'm telling you, I'm getting this in 35, might be optimistic, but I'm going to get it in 40. So it occurred to me, probably most people heard all those numbers that he was rattling off just fly by like some kind of insane calculator on crack. I actually went the time to go find his 12-point plan, and so we'll go through it now, and we'll see how much of it has redeeming qualities. Number one on his list is to raise the retirement age for Social Security to 69. So for you to get full retirement on Social Security, you have to make it to be 69 years old. Now, one of the reasons this becomes particularly interesting to me is knowing that my dad died at 60. My dad worked his whole life, slaved his entire life away. His body was wrecked when he died. His knees, his shoulders, his arms. And he died 9 years short of when Christie says that he should have been able to draw his just due for all those years. That strikes me as a little bit odd. But I'm a person that's willing to realize that there's an average, and certain people on average are going to reach a certain age. The average life expectancy for a man now is 76 years. So if you reach retirement at 69, you'd have 7 years. You'd have 7 years really to draw benefits. You tell me if that's good. You think working 46 years of your life to draw some meager returns for 7 years seems right? Now, keep in mind, Social Security is a safety net, and he addresses his 12-point plan, and we'll get to it, but I fully believe that, yes, there are some people that shouldn't get their Social Security, and we'll talk about who they are. Because it would help some of the people that do. Look, for most people that I've ever seen on Social Security, and I've not known a lot of rich people, but Most people I've seen on Social Security, they're on a poverty wage. I mean, it's not a living. It's just enough for them to just scrape by with a few food and items and pay the light bill, and they just have a hard time. And now you're wanting them to wait even longer. You want them to wait another 2 years. It just seems inherently wrong to me. If that's our safety net for our vulnerable senior citizens, I don't think punishing them for the screw-ups of the federal government is the answer to the solution. He also says, step 2, raise the eligibility for Medicaid so that you eventually have to be 67 years old to get it. Now, look, Medicaid is the medical for the vulnerable senior citizens who don't have a lot of money. They've probably worked their whole life, or they were poor, and they just don't have a big bank account. And so they count on Social Security, they count on Medicare to get them through. Look, people live longer, as he said. People do live longer, but the reason they live longer is because advancements in medicine, and advancements in medicine are expensive. There ain't nobody that ain't getting treatments living to be 80 or 90 years old. Very few. There are some people that are blessed that do that, but for the most part, people that probably would normally die at around 60 are living to 70. Why? Because doctors are able to do so many things now. They are able to go in there and whack you open and replace your nasty veins so you don't have a heart attack and give you an extra 10 years, which would have killed you 50 years ago. They're able to prolong things like prostate cancer that would have killed a 60-year-old a long time ago. Now, a prostate cancer guy can live another 10 years. But it's all that's expensive. If you want to live the extra years, you have to have the medical care, and you can't do that without the Medicare if you're a poor elderly person. So no, you don't make them wait longer and say that they can wait longer because people are living longer. The reason people are living longer is because they have access to the medical care that makes them live longer, and they need Medicare for that. Moron. So I'm not for either one of those. Here are some things I am for. Eliminating the payroll tax for seniors who stay in the workforce. Absolutely. You keep working past 62. Look, let's don't make them pay the tax anymore. Come on. Future retirees with income up to $80,000 get your full benefits, but if you're making over $80,000 a year in income, then you start on a sliding scale of how much percentage of your benefits you get. I think that's only fair. You got somebody over here who's making nothing, work their whole life, they have no income, and you expect them to live off of a $900 Social Security check, and you got a guy over here who has retired but is still bringing in $100,000 a year, and he's getting his full retirement check. That completely does away with the whole reason that we said it. There's not supposed to be fairness. Don't tell me about fairness. Don't tell me it's not fair that you're not getting yours. Because that's not what... Look, we can debate whether we need Social Security or not. I'm fully ready to have that debate. Because, no, it should have never been set up. People should be trained to save their money, to pinch, to scrimp, to live like paupers their whole life, and invest in good mutual funds. And, look, I didn't do it. I don't know anybody else that did it, but we all could have. Most of us could have. I would say 90% of the people I know could have done that, but we don't know anything about it. People want their iPhones and their big screen TV and their new Acura. And so, people could prepare for themselves, but the government takes the money away from you and then gives it back to you at pennies on the dollar when you turn 67 or whatever number it is now, 65, 67, 69. So yeah, if you're making $100,000, and the other part of his plan is if you're making $200,000 a year at retirement age, you just don't get any of your Social Security. I think that's perfectly reasonable. If you can't live on $200,000 and afford to give up your $900 a month to somebody who ain't got nothing, come on, what's wrong with you? Means testing for premiums, I think is what for Medicare. Look, if you're making $100,000 a year, come on, pay some copay, pay some premiums a little bit on your insurance. You don't get all that for free. It's not that we're not booting anybody to the curb, but you can afford it. You can afford it, and so let's help somebody that can. I don't think that's unreasonable. Cost sharing through higher income related premiums. Again, that's the same thing as it applies to prescriptions in Part D or whatever. Absolutely. If you're making $200,000, come on. You don't need us to foot the entire bill for your prescriptions. I'm not going to get into per capita caps indexed as enrollees as related per capita to the population of states. It's kind of complicated. I'm not going to get into that because I tried it in my failed podcast that I did earlier, and it just gets into a long... Look, you can research that on your own. Adjust the funds to the rate of inflation going forward? Absolutely. come on. $100 next year doesn't buy what $100 this year bought. If the government, and government causes inflation by printing money and borrowing money. That's where inflation comes from. And if they're going to punish us to where we can't buy the same thing next year with $100 that we bought this year with $100, then we need our benefits to be adjusted for inflation. I think that's only fair. Require small copays for Medicaid enrollees with income above the 100% federal poverty level. I'm almost down with that, but I think it needs to be higher. The federal poverty level is pretty low. So I would say if you're making 150% of the poverty level, then start paying some of your copays then. But maybe poverty. But I like the concept of it. I mean, out of his 12-point plan, I think a solid 8 of them are pretty good. I think some of them need to be tossed. But if you'd never heard it before, and God knows you didn't get a chance in the debate, because you don't get a chance to hear nothing in a debate. But to me, those were the salient points of the debate. The rest of it was just garbage. The rest of the debate was absolute garbage. It was just complete garbage. It was intended to rile people up, to cause people to speak loudly, to cause people to get on each other's nerves. And it was just horrible. It was just horrible. The whole thing was just horrible. Hopefully my podcast has enlightened you on a few of those issues that we got to expand on past the debates. And as we get closer to electing the leader of the free world. Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed any of it or part of it, please share it. If you haven't downloaded the app, that's the easiest way to listen. Head on over and do that as well. And I really appreciate it. I appreciate you more than you know.
Intelligence is sexy. This is the Brett Mason Show. You can subscribe to the podcast, download the free smartphone app, and find more ways to connect to the show at brett-mason.com/connect.